I now declare this 29th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts in order. Colleagues, two quick things before we begin. One, because of the votes that we had at 3 o'clock, we're a little late starting, but you will recall that as a result of the membership change, we don't have as many members, and if it follows the normal rotation, notwithstanding we have quite a number of presentations, we may only be off the mark by minutes. And at that point, committee can decide whether they've sufficiently dealt with this chapter or whether those few minutes matter, in which case we can have motions to reconvene. So my hope is, though, that we'll be able to consider this a full hearing. This is not an unusual circumstance. It's not the best, but it's not unusual. So hopefully with that we can proceed in the usual fashion. And the only other thing I wanted to mention was that I got back from Ukraine less than 24 hours ago, and I'm one of those that suffers badly from jet lag. So if you could just give me a little bit of leeway today, I'm pretty fogged up. Yeah, this is on top of that. Yeah. Okay. Colleagues, appreciate the cooperation. I also want to thank my Vice Chair for stepping in while I was in Ukraine and chairing one of the report writing sessions. Colleagues, with that, then, if there's no further interventions, I will turn to our guests. We have a full house today. To our guests, you're offered 5 minutes presentation. If there's any chance to shorten that without losing anything, that would be helpful. But if you need to give your full complement, the only one I will mention is that from the Treasury Board Secretariat, Mr. Watson, right, I understand that yours tended to be a little lengthy. You've already agreed to shorten that. With the agreement of the committee, I would suggest that we append his full remarks so that we still have them for the record and they would be considered part of our deliberations. And that way, Mr. Watson, you don't need to worry as much about things that you're trying to get in that shortened period of time. So I think we're good. All right, hearing no interventions, I'm going to ask each of you, you've already agreed on the order of presentation. I'm going to ask you to introduce your delegations. And Ms. Chang, you are stepping in today for Mr. Ferguson as the Assistant Auditor General. Welcome, ma'am. Pleased to have you here again. You now have the floor.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with your committee today to discuss this chapter on public sector pension plans from our 2014 spring report. Joining me at the table is Richard Domingue, Principal, who was responsible for this audit. Public sector pension plans have a large impact on the government's financial position. The net liability relating to these plans exceeds $150 billion. Pension plans are now operating in an environment where interest rates are low and plan members are living longer. It is therefore important that the plans be designed and managed in a way that not only considers present circumstances, but that also protects the interests of current and future employees and taxpayers.
Three main public sector pension plans: the Public Service, the Canadian Forces, and the RCMP. The audit objective was to determine whether the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, the RCMP, National Defence, and the Department of Finance Canada carried out selected key aspects of their governance and management responsibilities with regard to the public sector pension plans. Although we found that the entities we audited had carried out their responsibilities under the law, no one is responsible for the regular, systematic assessment of whether these pension plans are sustainable over the long term. It would be reasonable to expect that the plans be designed to be sustainable and affordable. We recommended that the Secretariat, in collaboration with the RCMP and National Defence, assess periodically the pension plan's sustainability. If deemed appropriate, they should recommend changes to plan designs so that they are up-to-date, affordable, and fair to current and future generations. We also found that the legislative framework that governs the pension plans disperses responsibilities among a number of entities and does not include a funding policy. So far, the Public Sector Pension Investment Board has assumed that the funding risks required to meet the rate of return on assets set by the actuary are acceptable to the government. Funding decisions related to the plans could have an impact on the government's budgetary framework. We recommended that the Secretariat, in collaboration with the other supporting entities, finalize on a timely basis a funding policy for all three plans. En vue de favoriser une plus grande transparence et une meilleure reddition de comptes.
Clear and complete information on the pension plans and good reporting on the budgetary impact of government liabilities are essential to allow for better transparency and accountability. We found that information on public sector pension plan liabilities is not user-friendly. We recommended that the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, with the collaboration of the RCMP and National Defence, prepare a proposal for a consolidated report with clear and understandable information on the public sector pension plans for consideration by the President of the Treasury Board. The Secretariat is in agreement with all three recommendations. In particular, it has committed to work with the RCMP, National Defence, and Finance Canada to implement a funding policy and propose a consolidated report for the three pension plans. We found that the Department of Finance Canada monitors the budgetary impact of the pension plans. However, it has not concluded on the merit of funding the pre-2000 pension liabilities. The government needs to assess the benefits and risks and determine if it would fund the liabilities. The Department of Finance has agreed with our recommendation and has committed to assess this issue in 2014-2015 fiscal year.
My opening remarks, we would be pleased to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Excellent. Thank you. And now we're moving to Treasury Board Secretariat. Mr. Watson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be as brief as I can. Thanks. I'm pleased to provide the government's response to Chapter 1 of the Auditor General's 2014 Spring Report, specifically how we'll act on the report's recommendations. I have with me today Kim Gowing, who is a director in the Pensions Branch, and also behind me I have Bela Kolk, who is Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for pensions and benefits. Le rapport du printemps de 2014
The Auditor General's 2014 Spring Report audited the three main public sector pension plans: the Public Service Pension Plan, the Canadian Forces Pension Plan, and the RCMP Pension Plan, as well as several other government employees are covered by this. The government accepted the recommendations of the Auditor General, and we are pleased that the report confirms that the Treasury Board Secretariat, National Defence, and the RCMP are meeting their legislative obligations and assuming their responsibilities.
General's first recommendation concerning the periodic assessment of these plans. We've recently reviewed them and taken steps to help ensure their long-term sustainability. We've increased employee contribution rates for the public service to reach 50-50 employer-employee cost-sharing ratio for public servants, with comparable increases for the Canadian Armed Forces and the RCMP. We've also raised the normal age of retirement from 60 to 65 for new employees who join public service after January 1st of last year, or 2013. These reforms are expected to provide $2.6 billion in savings by the fiscal year 2017-2018, and more than $900 million in annual savings after that. In addition to helping ensure the sustainability of plans, these actions will contribute to the ongoing stability of our pension costs as a percentage of pensionable payroll. To further strengthen collaboration among departments on sustainability, the Secretariat will establish this year an interdepartmental committee at the Assistant Deputy Minister level that includes the Department of Finance, the RCMP, and National Defence. This committee will manage pension-related issues across departments and coordinate work across departments on the government's response to the Auditor General's report. Regarding the Auditor General's second recommendation, the Secretariat will continue to work in collaboration with its partners to complete the development of the funding policy for all three plans. This policy will clearly identify the funding and financial preferences of the plan sponsor, establish parameters for monitoring and evaluating funding risks, and develop benchmarks for evaluating plan sustainability. La troisième recommandation préconise un rapport global.
The third recommendation calls for a consolidated report. In this area, the Secretariat will collaborate with National Defence and the RCMP to develop a proposal for a new consolidated report for the sponsor's consideration. If the proposal is accepted, the goal is to introduce this report for 2015-16. The fourth recommendation focuses on reviewing our governance practices. Again, the Secretariat will collaborate with its partners to review the governance practices for these plans and make recommendations to the plan sponsor. This work will serve to help strengthen the governance framework of the public sector plans and help ensure they remain affordable and sustainable. The fifth recommendation calls for assessing the cost of funding pre-2000 pension liabilities. The Department of Finance is better positioned to speak to this recommendation. However, I can tell you that the Secretariat has committed to supporting the Department of Finance in concluding the assessment of these obligations.
On the financial integrity of these plans and present detailed information on the plans and their liability through the public accounts in accordance with the standards prescribed by the Public Sector Accounting Board. Finally, while the Auditor General did not examine the sustainability of plans, we will continue to support efforts to ensure their affordability and sustainability in a way that is fair to both taxpayers and employees. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Over to Department of National Defense, Major General David Miller. You have the floor, sir.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, membres du committee. Ça me fait.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here representing the Canadian Forces, the Canadian Armed Forces, with David Grandmaison.
Plans, of course, are very, very important to Forces members, both as an incentive program, but also as a safety net for retirement. For this reason, we welcome the OAG report on behalf of all members who want to ensure that their pension entitlements are safe and being administered properly. It is reassuring to have the objective opinion of the OAG that these responsibilities have been met by the Department of National Defence. And to this end, the Canadian Armed Forces members who are looking for information with regard to the status of their pension plans may avail themselves of many resources, in particular the online detailed explanation of the provisions of the plans and access to the call center staffed by knowledgeable and experienced personnel. In light of the recommendations in the OAG's report and the action plan, we look forward to continuing our very close collaboration with our colleagues to improve the Canadian Forces pension plans, to ensure our members see that the plans are adding value as part of their military careers, but also, importantly, upon their retirement, so that they are confident that the pension plans will assist them in their transition to life beyond the military. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Major General. Appreciate the brevity. Over now to the RCMP, Assistant Commissioner Gilles Morel. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to respond on behalf of the RCMP to the recommendation of Chapter 1 of the Auditor General's 2014 Spring Report. I have with me Ms. Chantal Petic, former Director General of National Compensation, and Mme Geneviève Tremblay, Directrice des Services de Pension. The RCMP is pleased that the OAG's report confirmed that the RCMP has carried out its responsibilities appropriately. As highlighted by examples in the audit, the RCMP, through ongoing efforts, reviews plans provisions to minimize costs to the plan. The RCMP pension plan is an invaluable tool to attract and retain a competent workforce whose main goal is to provide the safety and security of Canadians. C'est pourquoi la GRC
For this reason, the RCMP agrees with the findings and recommendations of the Auditor General and recognizes the need for increased measures to ensure a sustainable and financially responsible plan for our members and for Canadian taxpayers now and in the future. In response to the recommendations put forward by the Auditor General, the RCMP is committed to supporting the Treasury Board Secretariat's action plan. We will look for their guidance and direction as we continue to collaborate with all government stakeholders in making informed recommendations to the plan sponsor. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity, and I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Merci beaucoup. We'll now move over to the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions Canada, our Chief Actuary of Canada, Jean-Claude Menard. You have the floor, sir.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. The Office of the Chief Actuary is an independent unit within the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions that provides a range of actuarial valuation and advisory services to the Government of Canada. While I report to the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, I am solely responsible for the content and actuarial opinions reflected in the reports prepared by my office. The OCA plays an important role in helping the decision makers, and as part of our mandate, we also conduct statutory actuarial evaluations on the pension plans covering the Federal Public Service, the Canadian Forces, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, federally appointed judges, and members of Parliament. These actuarial evaluations are conducted every 3 years, or whenever an amendment is made that has a significant impact on the financial status of a plan. The purpose of these actuarial evaluations is to determine the financial position of the plans and to assist the President of Treasury Board in making informed decisions regarding the financing of the government's pension benefit obligations. The actuarial assumptions used in the actuarial evaluations are determined independently by the OCA and are based on the best estimate of expected future events. They are revised every time a new valuation is performed based on economic trends and demographic experience. They also are conducted in accordance with accepted actuarial practice in Canada.
Life expectancy. Back in 1965, average life expectancy at age 65 was another 18 years, so people were expected to live until 80, with women living slightly longer than men. Today, retirees at age 65 can expect to live for another 20 years on average, again with women living slightly longer. If we project into the future, taking into account future assumed mortality improvements, that is, further future gains in life expectancies due to decreasing mortality rates, we could expect an additional 3 to 4 year gain in life expectancy at age 65. These expected future mortality improvements are embedded in our actuarial valuations of these pension plans. If the future improvements in mortality were not taken into account, the total actuarial liability of the 3 largest public sector pension plans, so the Public Service, the Canadian Forces, and RCMP, as at 31st March 2013, would be reduced by $7.7 billion, or 3.4%. In other words, in the liabilities already in the reports, there's a provision of $7.7 billion for future mortality improvements. In closing, I am pleased to quote the 2014 Spring Report of the Auditor General of Canada. We found that the Treasury Board Secretariat, the National Defense, and the RCMP respected the independence of the Chief Actuary. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee, and I would be very pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you for your
Thank you very much.
presentations. We have the Public Sector Pension Investment Board and the Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, and Chief Financial Officer, Mr. John Valentini. And you have the floor, sir.
Bon après-midi. Mon collègue.
Good afternoon. My colleague Martin Leroux and I are pleased to appear before the committee today as you examine Chapter 1 of the recent Auditor General's report. The activities of PSP Investments, more formally known as the Public Service Pension Investment Board, were not within the scope of the Auditor General's report, but we appreciate this opportunity to answer any questions you may have on our activities. I will keep my remarks brief to leave as much time as possible for your questions.
Corporation that was established in 2000 to invest the amounts transferred by the Government of Canada for the funding of the post-2000 obligations of the pension plans of the Public Service of Canada, the Canadian Forces, the RCMP, and since March 1st, 2007, the Reserve Forces Pension Plan. PSP Investment's statutory mandate is to manage the funds in the best interest of the contributors and beneficiaries and to maximize investment returns without undue risk of loss, having regard to the funding, policies, and requirements of the plans and their liability to meet their financial obligations. More simply stated, this means that PSP Investment's mandate is to ensure that, given the current level of contributions, we earn sufficient returns so that there will be enough assets to cover pension benefits. It is important to note, however, that factors other than investment performance can affect the funding status of the plans. For example, an increase in life expectancy, as mentioned by Jean-Claude, will increase the liabilities of the plans. Currently, the Chief Actuary has determined that this requires achieving a 4.1% rate of return after inflation over the long term. One can appreciate that achieving such a return objective is not risk-free. In fiscal year 2004, we adopted a portfolio diversification strategy that goes beyond public assets like stocks and bonds to include less liquid private asset classes such as real estate, private equity, infrastructure, and renewable resources. We are able to invest in less liquid assets because we are currently receiving between $4 and $5 billion every year, and it is projected that PSP will not be required to pay pension benefits until the year 2030. We can therefore have a long-term view. Of course, we expect to be rewarded for doing so by achieving some excess returns of illiquidity premiums, which investors typically demand for taking on illiquidity risk. Our overall strategy is expected to provide for better returns and a higher likelihood of achieving the target actual rate of return. So how does our performance so far compare to the actual rate of return? For the 10-year period since the adoption of our diversification strategy from April 1st, 2003 to March 31st, 2013, PSP Investments has recorded a compound rate of return of 6.1% after expenses and inflation. This compares to the 4.1% actual rate of return. In other words, on an annualized basis, we have exceeded the objective by 2% per year over 10 years. Ceci termine mes remarques. Nous sommes à votre disposition pour répondre.
That concludes my remarks. We are looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Okay, beginning the rotation. We'll start with Mr. Carmichael. You now have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you, Chair, and welcome to all of our guests. A big crowd today. So to keep it simple, I'm going to direct my question to Ms. Cheng, and you can certainly draw in some of your colleagues as need be. Ms. Cheng, as I listened to the reports, I must admit I came in here with some questions. Obviously, we've already met with the Auditor General, and he put many of my concerns at ease. And I have to admit, after listening to some of these reports today, particularly listening to Mr. Valentini at the end, I feel much better about what I'm going to ask you about, and that is sustainability. Major General Miller talked about how he and Canadian Forces welcome the OAG report on behalf of all members who want to ensure the pension entitlements are safe and being administered properly. Absolutely. It is reassuring to have the objective opinion of the OAG that these responsibilities have been appropriately performed at national defense. You went on, Ms. Cheng, to talk about one of your recommendations to simplify the process, consolidating the statements, which I think is a very wise idea. I come from a background in business, and so to see it in a more simplified, consolidated form, I think makes a lot of sense. But as we talk about sustainability, and one of the concerns that came out of the issuing of the report is that members of the media and the opposition were reporting after the launch of these books that claimed that the audit concluded that public sector pension plans were not sustainable. In today's reports, in the OAG report, under the scope of the actual audit, you talk about the fact that you didn't audit sustainability. In fact, the term, sorry, I'm just flipping through here. The reference is that the audit did not assess the sustainability of the pension plans. The audit did not examine the administrative processes, investment practices, and actuarial methods for valuation calculations. So I'm confused. The media, the opposition have one opinion on the sustainability of these very, very important programs, these plans. We want to see these plans sustainable for the long term, and Mr. Valentini, with compounded return of some 6+% annually, gives me good reason to believe we've achieved that. I wonder if you could just explain, where am I missing it? How does the non-sustainability square with sustainability when I'm hearing these reports today, if you wouldn't mind?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It would be useful to confirm the scope of the audit. As the member has pointed out, we have not audited the plans and concluded that the plans are not sustainable. The concern and the issue we raised was that there weren't any systematic and regular assessment of the plan's sustainability, as opposed to us concluding that the plans themselves are not sustainable. In the report, we also highlighted some factors that could bear on the sustainability, that could actually have adverse impact on the actuarial obligations, determined obligations of the pension plans. So we spoke to economic conditions, but one of the factors that the Chief Actuary, Mr. Menard, has pointed out is really indeed the improved longevity. And if I may turn to the report, Mr. Chair, I would like to perhaps point to the table 1.2 on page 8. There you'll see that back in 1970, on average, Canadians work about 3 years to collect 1 year of pension. So fast forward 40 years later, in collecting 1 year of pension, the Canadian worker would have worked about 1.7 years only. And Mr. Menard pointed out that the impact on the actuarial assumption on longevity actually amounted to $7.7 billion, and that's a big number. We also did some sensitivity analysis, and if I could point to another table in the report, that would be on page 13. Exhibit 1.3, you see that had the actuarial assumption be increased by either 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years, the numbers are like $4 billion, 8 billion, and 11 billion. So they're in the billions of dollars. So that's why it's important that we emphasize that it needs to be assessed on a regular basis. So the issue today is not that the plans are currently not sustainable. The issue is we need to make sure that we keep an eye on it, continue to do regular assessment to indeed make sure that they are sustainable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Carmichael, we're down to 10 seconds, which you can take.
I'm good. Thank
All right,
you.
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm sorry, I have to interject again. I'm advised that there's a vote in the House coming. We are expecting bells within the half hour. What I would seek is your consent to take us, say, until 5:20, and then at that point we would adjourn. And then we can decide at that time either quickly that we're good with this, or we can do it at a business meeting. But I would hope we can get, it takes unanimous consent, just so everybody understands, it takes unanimous consent for the committee to continue to meet during bells, while bells are being rung. But since we're just down the hall, I do propose that we're good till 20 after, but I'm in the hands of the committee. Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just concerned that, due to our obligations to the House for different votes and whatnot, we already saw quite a bit of the time today exasperated just on previous votes. So I'm just concerned that we may not get the full 2 hours so that we can conduct a draft report. But maybe we can see how far we can get, and then maybe we at that point can determine whether or not we need to invite our guests back again.
Sure.
I'm sure many of the committee members, like myself, have questions. We certainly want to get
Sure.
to the issue. So.
How about this? I think that's fair. How about this? Say at about 18 after, I'll conclude the proceedings and quickly go to the committee, and we'll make a quick determination whether we feel that we've adequately dealt with this chapter or whether we need to consider it under business for another meeting.
And just to clarify further, Mr. Chair, you said there was also some business you need to do at the end of this meeting?
No, I was saying that the business would be, what do we do with this? Either decide now or decide at a business meeting. But your suggestion is we do it now, so I'm good with that. At 18 after then, if everybody agrees, I'll bring us to the issue of, do we consider ourselves to have heard enough that we can write a report, or is there a need for a further hearing, recognizing how many people we're bringing on deck every time we have one of these. So why don't we do that? Is everybody in agreement? Do I have unanimous consent? I seem to have. Very good. Sorry. Then we will continue. We concluded Mr. Carmichael. Now over to Mr. Giguère. You have the floor, sir.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. I thank our witnesses for having come and made their statements. My question pertains to the dates of your audit, because they're relatively important to the extent that we've seen an improvement, a considerable improvement, in the return of pension funds over the last few months of the year 2013. This improvement, this major improvement of the return for 2013, does it appear in your audit report?
Audit relates to, it describes the period under examination. The period that we did examine has to do with April 1, 2011 up to March 2013. So that is the period under examination. It wasn't so much that it was an actual problem in terms of the current day issue. Of course, these economic conditions do change from time to time. If you roll back the clock a little bit further back in the days of the economic crisis with respect to 2008 onward, the dynamics were a little bit different. So economic conditions does change from time to time, and it further supports the point that we wanted to make, which is like there is a need for a regular assessment of the plan's sustainability. So the audit did not conclude that at a particular point in time that the plan was sustainable or not, but rather beg for the case to make sure that there's regular assessment.
In the documents, I didn't see the following. I saw a decision of the Supreme Court of Canada on an actuarial surplus of $18 billion that the federal government gave itself, 19 billion, sorry, through an accounting process. When the government takes a budget surplus during deficit times, we find ourselves in a very awkward situation. When the government uses that kind of an operation, what is the very long-term impact of that? Was that assessed by a government before taking these $19 billion?
The issue about the Supreme Court decision really has to do with an account that is called the Public Sector Superannuation Account. That account indeed is just a tracking account. It is not funded by assets, and the decision was made by Supreme Court justices. In terms of, I guess, further comments on that, I don't know if our colleague from Treasury Board would want to add any specific comments to that.
What I can say in that regard is that the government, as sponsor of the plan, remains responsible for any deficit in the plan, and therefore, with the Supreme Court's decision, we know full well that we're responsible for both surpluses and deficits. At this stage, we find ourselves in an actuarial deficit position. Our valuation for the period in question and the actuarial assessment are dated March 31st, 2011. So, in fact, not long after the second worst crisis in several generations. So the new evaluation, which will be forthcoming, will be led by the chief actuary as of this year. Thank you very much. You said that you didn't have access to all of the documentation from the Secretariat with regard to the preparation of various working hypotheses. And one of these working hypotheses was to go from determined benefits to a regime of determined contributions. The representatives of the government for the national defense and the RCMP, might they enlighten us and tell us how this change would be perceived with regard to their personnel management probabilities if their intent is to entice their staff to continue to work for those organizations, if they're losing the guarantee that they will have a set amount in their pensions, an amount that would be replaced by a different requirement. You would pay into it, but you wouldn't necessarily know what income you would be able to draw from your pension after retirement.
Someone, monsieur?
Yes, the RCMP and National Defense could perhaps respond and tell us what would happen if we move from a defined benefit system to a defined contribution system.
You go first, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as Canadian Forces is concerned, we are not assessing defined contributions at all. We are very pleased that it is a defined benefits package, and as far as we are concerned, that is the way that our pension plan is going to continue. Therefore, we will not and have not made such an assessment because as far as we're concerned, it is not on the horizon.
Dans la même direction.
So it's not something that we considered at the RCMP to date.
Up to you. Very good. Mr. Watson?
J'ajouterai très rapidement.
I would add very quickly that Treasury Board Secretariat President was very clear in the media. We're not envisaging such a plan from what we've been told. The clerk of Privy Council indicated in his 21st report on the public service that we've already established what the changes are, the necessary changes. And I can echo what my colleagues have said. We have not envisaged such changes for defined contributions.
Goes quick. Mr. Woodworth, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of you for being here with us today. And apologies for the fact that our time is a bit foreshortened because of votes. I'm going to direct my questions primarily to you, Mr. Watson, although I may get to some of the others. And I'm going to focus on the question of assessing the sustainability of the plans. And I'm going to start by referring you, Mr. Watson, to a statement on page 27 of the Auditor General's report in paragraph 1.83, which says, first, the plan sponsor does not address the sustainability of the plans. I will also refer you to the recommendation at paragraph 1.46, which says to support the plan sponsor represented by the President of the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat with the collaboration of the RCMP and National Defense should assess periodically the pension plan's sustainability. If deemed appropriate, the entity should recommend changes to plan designs so that they are up to date, affordable, and fair to current and future generations. So when I see the Auditor General saying, first, the plan sponsor does not address the sustainability of the plans, I then look to your evidence today, which says that you have recently reviewed the plans and taken steps to help ensure their long-term sustainability. And then you mention a few things about ratios and retirement age. And I wondered if your steps to do that were taken in response to the Auditor General's recommendation, or were they taken before the Auditor General's recommendation?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. In fact, the changes were brought into force for January 1st, 2013, so the work was ongoing well before this audit began. In terms of the sustainability, we have looked at the contribution ratios, which involves serious thinking, as any prudent person would do, about what the models might be. We have concluded on the model that we have, which is defined benefits. We work very closely with the Office of the Chief Actuary. We work closely with all the colleagues who are here today, which is why there are so many of us. We work closely with the pension advisory boards, who include bargaining agent representatives, for example, who are very interested in the question of the long-term sustainability of the programs. Without wanting to embarrass my colleague, the Chief Actuary, I suspect there would be very few people in this country who understand the fluctuations that are possible and the impacts of plans in terms of longevity and other related issues, as my colleague here across the way has. And so we worked very closely on these issues. We accept the point that the Auditor General has made, that we can do better on that front and that we can be more systematic about it, and we'll do so through the creation of a committee that will be involving finance, RCMP, Canadian Forces, and ourselves to make sure that that at no time ever drops out of sight.
So just then the one thought I had is that maybe when the Auditor General said the plan sponsor does not address the sustainability of the plans, and your evidence today said that you had recently reviewed the plans and taken steps to help ensure their long-term sustainability, I wondered if that meant that you were just doing that for your little corner of the world and not doing it for all the other plans. Is that the case?
We work very closely with all plans together, and as Mr. Valentini pointed out in his remarks, they invest the funds for all of these three plans, RCMP, Canadian Forces, and ourselves.
So then your work did, in fact, address the issue of sustainability of all the plans that we're speaking about today?
Yes, it did. Okay. And in fairness to the Auditor General's comments, we shared over 400 documents, 3 Treasury Board submissions. We held 13 meetings lasting 19 hours. 32 of our staff engaged with them over time. There would be hundreds, if not thousands, of phone calls and emails on this front. Right. But there are some things under the Orders in Council from 1985 and 2006 that we are not able to share because they're cabinet confidences. Another important number, though, that I think is important is the number 0, and that is the number of disputes that we had over whether or not relevant documents were inappropriately withheld.
Sorry, time has expired, but Ms. Chang wanted in. If it's very, very brief, given that you're acting Auditor General, please go ahead.
So very brief, just to address and clarify the observation we're raising. The reason we raised the issue of sustainability and no systematic regular assessment is because that wasn't legislated in any way. And in our conversation with the various stakeholders around the table, they felt that their duties are particularly restricted to what was laid out in legislation. So it was important to get to that ownership of the issue. So that's why we raised the issue, because it was stated that it's not a stated responsibility by statute, and therefore they don't actually have a role in conducting that sustainability. So hence we raised that. So I thought I'd just clarify that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Over to Mr. Albus. You have the floor, sir. Sorry. Oh, my apologies. I thought Mr. Right. I told you got to bear me a little flexibility here. Back to Mr. Jaguar and then Mr. Albus. My apologies. Well, you have the floor, monsieur.
In my previous intervention, I wasn't able to obtain the answer of the auditor with regard to point 142 and some hypotheses worked on by the Secretariat. Could you provide additional information because you worked on various assumptions of defined contributions.
Paragraph 142 refer to the situation whereby we asked the Secretariat to share with us whether they've done certain analysis relating to sustainability. So the conversation, as Mr. Watson pointed out, there was due diligence on their part to decide what they're able to share with us, what they weren't able to share with us. There were no specific analysis that help us understand how they might have looked at different hybrid plans and things alike. I think they made mention that some analysis were done, but we weren't able to see evidence of that, and audits are evidence-based, and without the evidence, we could not conclude that they have done so. So this was something that Treasury Board's been explaining to us that they have undertaken without forwarding sufficient evidence for us to support that.
And now comes the essential question. You say that there has to be continuous follow-up of these pension plans and their valuations, but if we cannot verify if there are substitution assumptions, it is difficult to determine the long-term viability, sustainability, and if the oversight is being done properly. In some other countries, the central bank intervenes and does this work. Some governments have bought back their actuarial debt for their pension plans and have thus capitalized it and excluded from the debt-bearing interest this liability. This analysis and follow-up, has it been done in Canada? Mr. Watson might perhaps intervene as well. Well, if we're talking about how we evaluated our risks and the actuarial impact on the funds, well, that is work that is done by the chief actuary, who works in close collaboration with us throughout each 3-year period during which these evaluations are done. With regard to the issue of the pre-2000 period, where we had a fund, it's my colleague from the Department of Finance who can discuss the government's approach in that regard. But I can guarantee you that in the context of assessing the actuarial risks, this is a task that is carried out in a very detailed fashion by my colleague, the Chief Actuary, who might be able to provide further information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to buying back the debt, I'm not a specialist in this field, but what we do with the actuarial report, for several years now, it's been the case, what we do is the following. As you know, years of service that are pensionable, as of 2000, they're capitalized, and the amounts are invested with the board, the investment board, PACP. In the report tabled with the government, you can see how the amount of the debt, and we're talking about 151 billion on March 31st, 2013, that's mentioned in the Auditor General's report. We explain how this debt will be spread out over the financial markets gradually. Right now we have the whole pension debt, 33% of it is invested with PSPIB, and the other 2/3 are still in the government's books. And as people get older, there will be a gradual transfer of those monies. So that in 2014, for example, about 90% of the liability will be borne by tangible assets. And the representative of Finance?
If I understand the member's question correctly as well, in terms of the process or the accounting process that the Government of Canada respects, is very much a leader in the context of the OECD, in the sense that we fully recognize the liability that's associated with these plans, whether funded or unfunded, on our balance sheet in the Public Accounts of Canada. And when you compare us to Italy, France, and some of our G7 and larger OECD community partners, we are vanguard. We are out in front in terms of a clear recognition that these liabilities exist and their presentation in the Public Accounts of Canada. Now, with respect to the fact that, as the Chief Actuary said, in part, some of these are funded and others are unfunded. And our commitment in the context of this audit was to continue or to finalize the assessment of whether or not the unfunded portion should indeed be funded, that the Government of Canada should go and raise $150 billion on capital markets and hand it to the PSPIB for effectively funding and creating an asset pool for those currently unfunded liabilities. So that's part two. But part one is make no mistake that these liabilities are recognized in the Public Accounts of Canada.
Great. Time's expired. Thank you. I'm sure nobody's trying to deliberately confuse me, but I understand, Mr. Albus, you're going to move your time down, and it's going to go over to Mr. Woodworth right now, correct? Very good. So, Mr. Woodworth, you have the floor again, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to Mr. Albus. I just need to pursue the exchange that we had a few minutes ago. And again, I'll address my question to you, Mr. Watson. What Ms. Cheng said is that the reason the Auditor General's report stated the plan sponsor does not address the sustainability of the plans is because there is no statutory onus on the plan sponsor to do that. And as I understood her comments, there was some reluctance for anyone to take ownership of that because it wasn't statutory. But am I correct in understanding, in fact, that your department, which I understand to be Treasury Board Secretariat, in fact, did take ownership for it and did, in fact, review the plans and take steps to help ensure their long-term sustainability? Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The entire reason for moving to 50-50 and to changing the terms of the plan to change the retirement age to 65 was exactly to ensure their sustainability going forward.
You were comfortable to take ownership of that without the necessity of having a specifically stated statutory onus to do so, I assume, or else you would have done it.
Quite comfortable doing that. Having said that, there's always room for improvement in something as important as this, but we did it, and we did it quite willingly.
Do I understand that you are intending to duplicate the same process going forward in some way, shape, or form, regardless of whether or not there is a statutory onus to do so?
Absolutely. Good. Yes, and we'll set up a committee to work on it.
So that's was going to be my next question. Can we expect to hear a plan in the not too distant future to address what I expect would be another concern of the Auditor General, that is that it needs to be systematic and written down process going forward? Can we expect to see that coming out of the committee that you've mentioned?
Absolutely. Be able to do that. We hope to have our first meeting this summer.
All right. It may be premature for you to answer this question, but do you have any expectation of a timetable to come up with that systematic duplication of what you've already done going forward? Is there a timetable in mind?
Well, one of the key things is looking at governance. So later this fiscal year, beginning of next fiscal year, we want to make sure we've done a good benchmarking study, because we want to look at other similar players around the world to see what the best practices are in governance. And then from there, we hope to have a plan that we're able to get considered and approved the following fiscal year.
I won't try and push any further on that. I will expect that you'll come up with a first-rate plan and that it will duplicate the success you already had as a result of the 2012. And with that, Mr. Chair, if I have any time remaining, I will defer it back to Mr. Albus.
Yeah, good. Just under 2 minutes, Mr. Ellis.
Thank you, and I hope to have an opportunity to do a more full-time round, because I do have a number of questions. I'm just going to start with Mr. Leswick first. On page 5 of the report, it's a very simple question. It says public sector pension plan liabilities are part of the non-market debt of the Government of Canada's interest-bearing debt. So I just have a quick question for you in regards to this. It's obviously interest-bearing because there's in the next page there's talk of that. Is this an actual line item or some sort of internal loan that the government does? Could you just explain that a little further?
Do you want to tackle it? So again, there's the funded portion and the unfunded portion. In the context of the unfunded portion, this liability is credited with interest, with an interest charge that we discount at a rate that is equivalent to, a methodology as applied by the OCG of a average of the weighted stream of the government, 20-year weighted average of the government's long-term bond rate. So that's effectively, even though it's unfunded, the interest charge is accrued against the account is in that amount against that procedure.
But are you registering this as an internal line item, just saying that yes, in the future we do have to so we have to carry that so it's in the public accounts, or is there actual money set aside?
There is not actual money. It's
Yeah, okay.
an unfunded obligation, but it is a line item in the sense that we bring that interest expense into the government's income statement on an annual basis.
And that the next logical part then, obviously, the interest off that's not a cash payment. That's, again, also the same kind of methodology, correct?
Correct.
Okay, no, that's very good. Thank you very much. I'll go to Mr. Watson. Okay. And I will hopefully get another round at some point,
You will.
Mr. Chair. Thank you all for coming today.
You will. Thanks, Mr. Albus. Appreciate the cooperation. Moving along, Madame Jones, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests today for your presentations. I've been listening to questions from my colleagues, and I'm going to refer to Section 1.49, and a question, I guess, is for you, Mr. Watson, in which it was noted in the report that the Secretariat's pension and benefits sector started to draft a funding policy for public service pensions in 2010. And I know you talked a little bit about it already, but let's fast forward now to 2014. And can you give me an update? Is the policy still in draft form? And why has it been so long, or why has so little change with regard to this commitment that goes back 4 years?
Excellent. Thank you very much for the question. Under the existing legislation, there is already a requirement that the plan be invested in a way that it works towards the goals that are set by the chief actuary, in this case 4.1%, in a way that doesn't bring undue risk to the fund. We recognize we need to go beyond that and do a funding plan. We've begun work on that. When we were doing the significant changes related to sustainability in 2012, that was a considerable amount of work to make sure that we get that right for what's probably the biggest, or at least one of the biggest pension plans in the country. And so the funding plan work has not advanced as quickly as it would have had we not done that. But we continue to work on that, and we expect to have that done sometime in the next fiscal year.
Okay. I don't know, Madame, if you would like to add to that comment in any way.
No real comments to add.
Okay, thank you. My next question, again, is related to Section 1.42, and I know that my colleague, Mr. Gagier, has already raised some pieces around this. But I guess what I found that stuck with me in the report was when you indicated that the Secretariat officials stated to you in their audit that they had conducted some analysis on other pension designs, but at the same time was not prepared to share any of the analysis, any of the information, and any of the evidence, I guess, to support the design of the plan and the steps that they had taken. And this causes me grave concern, because we're dealing with thousands of Canadians who are very dependent upon what happens and how these plans are being managed, and ensuring that the sustainability of it is there for them and for their families. And I think that all of us in this room, as well as everyone else who's in a position of Parliament, wants to ensure that those guarantees are there for Canadians. So I guess for me, I have great difficulty always when I am asked to take my word that we've looked at this and this is the best possible options. And I guess I'm looking at it from the view of people who work in the RCMP and the Canadian Forces in the public service, and I'm saying to myself, is this acceptable? So my question would be to the Auditor General, you know, how can you properly do the analysis that you need to do if you don't have the information and the evidence to support the audits that you're working on? And I would say to Mr. Watson, why would you not want to share this information to verify that the Government of Canada has made the best decisions possible in the interests of Canadians?
Go ahead.
I would just say, I think it's important to differentiate between the evidence around the decisions we did make and the decisions we didn't make. So the assumptions that support the decisions that we did make are assumptions largely based on the work of the chief actuary. And those assumptions, actuarial assumptions, are available in various reports, and those are quite detailed, and happy to talk about those in a briefing. What's being talked about in the section that you referred to are the decisions we decided not to proceed with. And so in terms of understanding what we use as assumptions, including things like the $7.7 billion that are set aside to deal with longevity issues that might change, those are all very public parts of our decision.
Mr. Chair, perhaps if I could add our perspective, as the member pointed out, access to information is essential and crucial to the nature of our work. We would not be able to accept a representation by management and government and then conclude that that work is acceptable without seeing the adequate evidence. Having said that, in this particular case, we were concerned about whether there is ways and means in terms of assessing its sustainability on an ongoing basis. So when the government indicate that in leading up to the budget 2012, there were certain provisions made, there were a number of analyses done, we basically like to know, has that due diligence been sufficiently carried out? When the evidence wasn't presented to us, we just would not conclude on that and give them the benefit of a doubt. But that did not stop us from coming to the conclusion that really there needs to be an upfront acknowledgement that they would do this on a systematic and periodic basis, because there's been a number of conversations over the course of the audit to sort of say, would the government, would Treasury Board be doing this? Would another entity be doing this? Does somebody really have that responsibility to carry the assessment of sustainability on a regular basis? That was never made clear all through the audit, leading right up to the conclusion of the audit. Hence, we made that recommendation, and there's receptiveness on the part of the government to actually take that on. Coming back to the question of access, it is fundamental, but in this particular case, it did not prevent us from coming to a major observation and recommendation we want to get to, and that's why we just basically noted for information and did not go further with that.
Very good. Thank you so much. Over to Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to Mr. Watson, under page 8, and speaking of budget 2012, the changes that the government did make, it says here that will result in cumulative savings of over $2 billion for Canadian taxpayers by the 2017-18 fiscal year. So that basically, just a very quick question, that's about $400 million a year. Is that correct?
$2.6 billion is what we've calculated at before 2017-18, $900 million a year after that. So 2.6 divided by 4.
It says $2 billion for taxpayers, but so 2.6 is the estimated amount?
That's the amount that I work with.
Okay, no, that's so well over $400 million a year then.
Right.
Okay, well that's a very good thing to have. Ms. Cheng, I just want to give you a compliment. It's not often, I've been in municipal circles and obviously here for close to 3 years, and no one has really defined sustainability, of course, in the fiscal sense that's here. So it's just very nice to read a document that actually defines it. So, so full kudos to your office for doing that. I did have another question for Mr. Watson. If you go to page 17, my question is here, that it was raised just at the very top. At the time we were completing this audit, the Secretariat, pension and benefit sectors was still not fully staffed. I think that goes back to the ongoing capacity need. Can you just give us an update on where that is now?
Sure. These are highly specialized staff, as you can imagine, unlike, say, staffing or classification, where you'd find them in every department across government. These are very specialized people, and so we have just recently made some significant hires and continue to do so, but it is one of the areas in the economy where people who are this good at this type of issue are in high demand.
Sure. Now, again, you obviously, finance is involved to give an overall idea of the economy. That happens on a regular basis. Treasury Board Secretariat constantly checks, along with the Office of the Chief Actuarian, to make sure that the formulas are being applied and checking up. I know we've heard from the PSIB before, and in some cases the government's had to top up because the actuarian numbers weren't quite on. So, in your opinion, there is an ongoing, continual check to make sure that the assumptions that the government is operating are correct, and that from time to time that accommodations for changes in either the formulas that are used or the general performance of the economy. Would you say that that happens?
It's ongoing and constant with all the players around this table. I doubt there's a single week, and you may even get to a single day of the year where there isn't at least one conversation amongst those of us around this table.
And with these new hires, would you say that the ability for Treasury Board Secretariat to carry out its role to ensure that everyone is, steering in the correct direction and that everyone is sharing information so that you can make better decisions more appropriate to what Ms. Cheng and the Auditor General office has recommended. Is that correct?
One of the things that happened in my 25 years of public service is pensions have suddenly become cool, and attracting people to work in pensions is way easier than it was before.
Okay, that's very good. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
I was going to take us at 18. We're pretty close to that now.
Okay, well, just out of, we'll just move into our business, but I do thank our witnesses today. And hopefully we'll get a better opportunity because I did have some questions for some of the other witnesses.
Good.
Thank you.
And it is my understanding there's been some discussion among the caucus leaders, and we're going to look at another hour. Am I correct?
Actually, we were betting who was going to win the next hockey game, but no. Yes, Mr. Chair. We'd like to have at least, I believe if you seek, you'll find unanimous consent to stop the meeting now and then to invite the witnesses we had today for another round. I think an hour or less would be appropriate and possibly tapered to a business meeting where maybe we're doing report writing, et cetera.
Yeah.
But at your discretion, Mr. Chair.
Sure, fine. And I'll try, see if we can do this real quick. If not, we'll have a discussion at a committee. But June 4th is open right now. My sense is that's when we could have been or would have been doing report writing. We could easily slot in the final hour on this hearing and then go into committee business. Availability, quickly look at your schedules, please. I know it's short notice. Yep.
Just intervene. Can we leave it at your discretion? I'm fine with that date, but I do want to have some of the guests here because I do know other members may have specific questions.
Yeah, no, I was talking about guests.
I'm trying to nail it now. You could, and the clerk could maybe arrange that because we do have a vote. So.
We do. But I'm going to tentatively ask all of you. I'm seeing some heads nodding now because this is important. I appreciate that's why I want to grab them now. I see some heads nodding. So at this stage, we are tentatively, you'll hear a confirmation from our clerk, but tentatively right now, we're looking at June the 4th. I think we'll do the public hearing first in the first hour, and then we'll slip into committee business. So that's where we are. Tentative, subject to me finalizing that, but we are looking at June the 4th for one more hour, and then a committee, then we'll go into committee business and finish off the report that Vice Chair Carmichael had led at the last meeting. And with that, colleagues, we shall go to the House and vote. To our guests, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the 4th. We stand adjourned.